Welcome back. Today we're going to do a video on how to buy a Honda ATC. What are the things you need to look for if you're in the market for buying an old Honda three-wheeler? Whether it's an ATC 70, 200E Big Red like this, 250 Big Red, 200M. Hey, there's some things you need to look for that are common to all of those ATCs, and we're going to go over them with you today so you can make an informed decision on whether or not the ATC you are looking at is the right one for you. So here's a pretty typical place you might find an ATC. Out back behind someone's house, covered in a tarp, under a lean-to like this. They always seem to be left outside. Looks pretty good from a distance, but let's take a closer inspection and see how good this machine really is. Alright, so let's take a walk around this bad boy. First things I'm looking at when I'm coming up to this ATC is, let's take a look at the seat. Obviously, somebody was trying to work on this ATC, probably couldn't get it started, had a hard time and just stopped their progress where they were at. The seat's all missing all of the padding, or some of the padding, and it's missing the cover. So this thing has been set outside for quite a while. You know where else we're going to look, see if it's been set outside for a while? The headlight. Let's take a look. Yep, look at this. The headlight is very faded. So that tells me this thing's been out in the sun at some point in its life. The tires look good. The tires are, let's see. Tires are holding air, so we know that this hasn't been sitting abandoned for that long. Let's take a look at the plastic. You see on this one here, there's a crack in the plastic, and the plastic's been deformed. This has been possibly hit something here, where it cracked it like that, or it's been flipped, and the rat could have pushed down on it, because the brace that supports that plastic's up under here. So what you're looking at is deformations in the plastic, cracks in the plastic, and some of these problem areas. This is going to be one of your problem areas here. Everybody that's ridden a Honda ATC, usually the beginners have run over their foot by putting their foot back here. Is this caught on anything? Has it been has it hit a stump? Has someone's leg gone back here and it rolled into the tire? Those are some places on the rear plastics you're going to take a look at. Take a look at the front plastic. Has this hit anything out there in the woods? It bumped into a tree. This one looks real clean here. I'm looking for any cracks in along the sides, down on the bottom. Something I notice about this plastic is it's missing the splash guard. So take a look at that. Does it have the original splash guard? Is it beat up? While you're at the front of the ATC, you're going to want to take a look at the forks. A lot of times these get bent. You want to look if you look from the front and one fork is off at an angle, or if both of them are off an angle, if the front tire looks like it's sitting funny, look for that. Here, you want to take special care on any of the ones that have front suspension. At the shock boots we're looking at right here, I see this one has a small hole. Maybe you can see better if I hold it this way. Right in here, there's a little tear in the shock boot. So if this has had a lot of water going in your shock boot, it's been filling up the lower part of the shock absorber on these forks, and they will get rotted out in there. Some of these are impossible to rebuild. Some of them can be rebuilt in a machine shop. You don't want to have to get into that. You're probably, if these are all bad, if these boots are all gone and these are all rusted up and they're frozen, you're probably going to want to get another set of forks from 200M or something to put on this 200E Big Red that we're looking at. Another thing, when you're looking at the forks, if that has had a lot of water going down into the tear in the seal and it's no good down in the bottom part, a lot of times you'll feel a play as you rock it back and forth. It'll clunk a little bit because they get loose in there as they get all blown out. So check that. Check to see if the front will compress at all. Oh, these look like they're frozen. I don't see much compression taking place here, so I'd be concerned about that. Of course, if you're looking at one of the older ATCs that does not have a front suspension, then you're primarily, like we said before, looking for bent or damaged forks. Another thing is you move around the side of this ATC, the handle for the Recoil is laying down here on the side, and the rope for the Recoil is extended out, and it looks like it's all rusty. I'm going to say this has had a lot of water that's gone down inside the Recoil. The spring has got rusty, probably. Okay, the motor does turn over, but this Recoil would need to be taken apart and repaired. You can also see if it feels like it shifts. if the ATC does not start. You can see if it engages. Okay, high range and low range engaged. This one does not have reverse. If it has reverse, you want to check that as well. Coming up to the handlebars, again, you're going to want to look for anything that's bent if this has been flipped. I know this has been turned over at some point because the brake lever for the rear brake is broken off. So that would need to be replaced. Also indicates that there could be other damage on the ATC when it was flipped. The grips on this are pretty well worn. This has a lot of hours on it. If you haven't ridden the ATC very much, obviously you're not going to put a lot of wear on the grips. If the grips are worn off or are totally gone, that give you an indication of how many hours this machine might have on it. Okay, looking underneath the seat. This battery is supposed to be good. We're going to see if it'll turn over at all. It's been sitting for several months. I'm looking at the air box. It's missing one of the wing nuts. Okay, some of the other ones are partially engaged, which is telling me that somebody's probably putting starter fluid or something down here to try to get it going. The air filter is sitting on the back, so that was taken out. Obviously, this air filter is no good, would need to be replaced. Air box is intact, no breaks down in there that I can see. Let's see if it'll turn the motor over. Actually, the battery sounds pretty good. Doesn't want to start. When I was testing the starter button and the battery, made me think of this choke. This choke does operate freely. You're going to want to make sure the choke can move. If the choke cannot move, then either the cable is completely rusted solid or it's frozen up at the carburetor. So check for that. Check the throttle itself. It does move freely. I can hear it engaging inside the carburetor. Okay, let's look at the rear end of the machine. Something's popping out at me immediately. This has no chain guard over the sprocket. So what happened to that? We don't know. The rear brakes are not connected. Almost always the drum is frozen up. Let's check that. This one does have movement, so it's not frozen. So probably the rear axle was replaced at some point and the brakes were never hooked up. Is going to be what I'm going to say on this. Right here, the muffler, this is all loose. You want to be wondering what's happening with that. Underneath is a rusty clamp up in here that I can see. Doesn't look like it's holding on anything right now. This plumbing stuff here is holding the exhaust on. So there's no cracks in the brake light, so that looks good. Okay, the rear rack definitely has some problems. First of all, we're missing the section that covers your little glove box. I can see that there's some deformation on some of the pipes on the rack, which is telling me that this probably was flipped at some point. Inside the glove box, now we got an old bottle of water in there. Nothing else, just a registration. Noticing here, the rear brake lever appears to be just hanging. I can get it to move a little bit. So obviously the return spring that would normally pull this up is missing. And it looks like it's probably somewhat frozen up because it's not falling down. It does have movement, the cable's moving, but it could have rust in there. Something you'd want to look for. The front brake is hooked up. Cable does not appear to be rusty. See if it has any movement when I pull the handle. It is moving. No, it does appear that it, well, let's see if it rolls without it. Okay, it rolls. It doesn't roll. So you do have some brake to the front. Okay, so we've done a walk around on the bike. We've looked at the plastics. We've looked at the forks. We've checked the brakes, the rear end, some different things on the machine. Now, what about the engine and the transmission of the machine? One thing you could do is you could pull the spark plug, especially if the machine won't run. You just want to gauge, what's the condition of the engine. Pull the spark plug out. I do have a video that I will have linked in the description that is how to change a spark plug on a Honda ATC in case you don't know how to check that. You could check for spark. When you pull the spark plug out, you could ground it against something and you could have somebody pull the recoil, or if the battery's hooked up like this one, you can just see if there's spark to the plug. You want to check the exhaust here, make sure there's no gaping holes or anything that looks like it would give you a problem. We did check to see that it does shift through the gears on the other side. So that's, I mean, more or less, that's about all you can do to gauge what kind of condition the ATC's in. You could pull the gas tank off and check the carburetor. You could check just to make sure that the ignition coil's up here. And again, I have videos on the ignition coil replacement, the carburetor replacement, all this stuff on my channel. Links will be in the description, so check for that. Finally, probably the last thing I would recommend you check is inside the gas tank itself. Has there been a bunch of water in this tank? Has there been a bunch of rust in this tank? Bring a flashlight with you. I don't have a camera that can really get down in there well, but it's a good sign that we're not seeing a lot of rust here. Bring a flashlight, look down at all corners of that gas tank, see if there's a bunch of rust or contaminants that might be in there. So I hope you found this video informative on things to look for when you're potentially buying a Honda ATC. Definitely make sure you go over everything I showed you in this video. Watch my other videos on Honda ATC to give you a broader idea of how everything works on an ATC. And finally, you're going to want me to tell you, well, how much is this ATC worth? I can't tell you that. It's only worth as much as you're willing to pay for it. And I know that's a cop-out answer, but I'm here in Maine. My prices in Maine are going to be different than somebody in Alaska or somebody in Hawaii that's looking at an ATC. So do your homework in your area, what the value is on these machines, and do a good job. And most of all, once you get it home, keep it running, keep it alive, and enjoy riding it. So have a nice day. Subscribe to this channel if you want any more Honda ATC videos, other things that I'm covering in my machine shop, farm tractors, and all that.